What's going on, guys? The Comics Kid 2099 here. Welcome to day 362 of the 365-day graphic novel review challenge. Today, I want to talk to you about Earth 2 Society, Volume 1, Planetfall. This collects the first 7 issues of a new Earth 2 series that spins out of the events of World's End, which was a 26-issue weekly series. This also collects DC Sneak Peek Earth 2 Issue 1, and this book has the potential to be really good. The big problem is that it is written by Daniel H. Wilson. Daniel H. Wilson was the mastermind behind the World's End event, which basically killed any interest that I had in Earth 2, and basically ruined the entire series and ruined everything awesome about this series. This volume picks up on a brand new planet where the survivors of Earth 2, they have colonized this world in 4 or 5 really large spaceships. This is basically the very end of the Battlestar Galactica reimagining from about 10 years ago. It's basically that premise as an ongoing series with superheroes. At the very end of World's End, what was left of human society got in these big spaceships, and then they got into outer space, and then they get to this other planet, and they're trying to make it work on this new world and basically start over. The problem is that, like I said, this is written by Daniel H. Wilson, and he is not a very good writer. I actually looked this guy up because I had never heard of him before I started reading World's End. It turns out that he is primarily a novelist. He has written a lot of science fiction novels. He has written very few comic books. In fact, the only comic book stuff that he has written, or at least the only stuff that he was credited with on Amazon, was World's End and this volume. So he doesn't have a whole lot of experience with comic books. I have no idea why DC Comics tagged him to be in charge of the World's End event, because it wasn't very good, unless he is just a killer author and they were big fans of his novels and they thought that he could bring something to the world of comics, and then they found out that he could not. I have no idea. But anyway, this picks up on some of the stuff that was going on in the World's End series, and also tries to take the series in a new direction. I think that this is better than World's End, but since World's End was one of the worst series that I've read this year, that's not saying a whole lot. Also, if you are jumping from World's End straight into this series, there are some things that are very confusing. That's what I'm doing. I went straight from World's End to this. Apparently, Convergence, which was a big event at DC a few years ago, apparently that takes place in between World's End and Earth 2 Society. It explains how there were several characters that seemingly died at the end of World's End. It explains how those characters are now here on this brand new world, seemingly alive and well. Green Lantern, Val Zod, The Flash, Thomas Wayne, and Dick Grayson, they were all on Earth whenever all these spaceships left the planet, and then Darkseid seemingly killed them with his Omega beams, and now here they are on this planet alive and well. And then you've got other characters who were on the spaceships who were nowhere to be seen in this series, like Mr. Terrific, Mr. Miracle, Barda, the Tamaranian Fury who worked for Darkseid. Those characters were all on the spaceships, and World's End was acting like we were going to see them again, and they were going to be somehow a part of this new status quo, but they are nowhere to be seen in this series. Also, Dr. Fate, he kind of vanished in the last half of World's End, but then we saw him very briefly before everything went to heck, and he is nowhere to be seen here either. So there's a lot here that it feels like Daniel H. Wilson is still trying to pick up the pieces to everything that fell apart in World's End, and it's just not working very well. I have no idea why Dick Grayson is just lying on this planet with a broken back. Maybe those questions would be answered if I read Convergence, but as I mentioned a couple times in the last few days, this series should really try a little harder to give me some pointers on what books I should read. If I'm supposed to read Convergence and it explains what happened to Thomas Wayne, why Dick Grayson is on this planet with a broken back, why all of these characters aren't on Apocalypse dead, if this is supposed to explain those questions in that Convergence series, then this book needs to tell me, hey, go read Convergence before you read this. It will explain some of the questions that you have if you read Earth 2 World's End. So that's a little bit problematic. Having said that, even if you just jump into this series, if you didn't read the original Earth 2 series or World's End, if you just want to read this series, maybe you heard that it's kind of like Battlestar Galactica with superheroes and you're interested in that concept, this book is just not very well written. It keeps jumping back and forth between when the remnants of humanity landed on this new world, and then 12 months later. It keeps jumping back and forth between these two time periods, and it's a little difficult to keep up with what's going on. And I think if you sorted out all of this and looked at it chronologically, you would realize there's not much of a story here. Apparently, the villain here is supposed to be a mystery, except that the DC Sneak Peek Earth 2 Issue 1, it kind of spoils everything that is played as a big mystery later on in this book. It shows us who the bad guy is, it shows us a couple of the characters who were allied with that bad guy, and then we jump right into the 12 months ago, present day, jumping back and forth between that, and there's basically 3 different time periods that we're having to keep up with. There's stuff that happened when humanity came to this new world, then there's stuff that's happening 12 months later, and then there's stuff that's happening in that DC Sneak Peek issue that's actually right around the time of issue 5 of this series, I think. So really, it's just 2 timelines, but it's a little confusing when you start the book with something that's happening concurrently with issue 5, and that's supposed to be something that's supposed to get you excited for this series, but it spoils a huge thing in this book, and it also is taking place 5 issues in. I feel like this should have been something that kind of whets your appetite a little bit, gets you interested in this series, but doesn't provide a gigantic spoiler for who the bad guy is of this series. Also, I feel like this provides even more context for Earth 2 World's End. If you'll remember, I said that Earth 2 Volume 6 Collision, I said that that book was just really terrible, and then I read Earth 2 World's End Volume 1, and it kind of made some of the stuff that happened in Volume 6 make a little bit more sense. Well, now, reading this makes Earth 2 World's End make a little bit more sense. I feel like Daniel H. Wilson, when he was putting together everything that he wanted to do in World's End, he had a couple of ideas for this series that he was basically setting up in that series. For example, Dick Grayson is a complete waste of space in World's End. He doesn't do anything worthwhile. He's basically just there. He keeps singing the same broken tune that Michael from Lost was singing. I need to find my son. Help me find my son. I'm going to get him back. We keep hearing him say that over and over and over again. He loses his son and finds him about 15 times in the course of World's End. And then that's all to set up the origin for a brand new Batman that we get here. By the way, Dick Grayson should not be Batman. He had 3 hours of training from Ted Grant in World's End, and that's it. Before that, he was a reporter. He has no business being Batman, and this book acts like he's a really good Batman, like he has as much training as Bruce Wayne in our world, and generally Bruce Wayne has like 10 years of training. You cannot make me believe that a reporter with 3 hours of combat training from Ted Grant is able to be an effective Batman. That's just stupid. I like the idea of replacing Thomas Wayne, especially since he was getting on up there. He was like 65 years old, and he was relying on the Miracolo to be able to fight crime, but it does not make any sense that Dick Grayson is the new Batman here. You could have had Huntress be the new Bat person. I would have been okay with that. It doesn't make any sense that Dick Grayson is Batman here. Then you've got different stuff here like Huntress and Power Girl. They are kind of at odds in this book. Huntress wants to turn on this Genesis device because this is straight up stealing stuff from Star Trek Search for Spock with the Genesis device, which was actually, I think, also from Wrath of Khan too, or also, now that I think of it. But anyway, we got this Genesis device, which, if turned on, it is going to turn this world that they are on into a different. It's going to be a duplicate of the Earth that they came from. And Huntress wants to do this. Red Arrow wants to do this. And then spoilers, Jimmy Olsen, he is actually pulling their strings because he's evil now for some reason. And that's another thing that I think that Daniel H. Wilson was setting up in World's End by having Mr. Miracle's mother box turn Jimmy Olsen into a god. And now suddenly he's evil. I don't really understand why. I guess the reason is Red Arrow yelled at him and told him that he needs to start acting like a kid, and so suddenly he's, wahaha, I'm evil and I'm going to control the planet. It's a really lame motivation for a supervillain, but you got Huntress, who wants to turn on the Genesis device, and then everyone else is against her. Power Girl is against her. All these other characters who, it doesn't make any sense that they're against each other. Power Girl and Huntress were bosom buddies. Power Girl, you get the feeling whenever you read Earth 2 World's End that she would kill and die for Huntress, and now they're ready to kill each other over this Genesis device. Speaking of Power Girl ready to kill people, she has this argument with Val Zod. We find out that Val Zod, when he was a guest of Terry Sloan on the original Earth 2, that he is the one who designed the fire pits on Earth. And that does not make any sense at all, because we are told numerous times in Earth 2 and in World's End that Terry Sloan is the world's smartest man. Why does he need Val Zod's help in creating the fire pits? And basically this is supposed to be be the reason that Val-Zod is a pacifist. That doesn't make any sense. Why can't he just be a pacifist because he's a pacifist? People don't need reasons not to want to hurt people. I think that's a really dumb addition to his character. It doesn't make any sense. Basically, it's just there so that these two characters don't like each other in this volume, which by the end of this volume, everyone is shaking hands and hugging each other, so we didn't even need that anyway. All of this drama is forced and not organic at all. It doesn't make any sense. It's really dumb. Fortunately, I can say that this series is probably going to improve because starting with the next volume, it is no longer written by Daniel H. Wilson, who is one of the worst writers that I've ever read. This series is awful. Daniel H. Wilson, thank you for killing Earth 2 and my interest in this series. I don't think that anyone could resurrect this series and bring it back to the greatness that it was at. So thank you for that. That is awesome. Anyway, this book is better than Earth 2 World's End, but still not great. I would give it a solid 5 out of 10. It's about halfway good. There are some things here that I really like. I like the premise of this series. I like the idea of them settling on a new world and trying to make things work. But it does feel like this world is very empty. It feels like there's about 7 people who live on this world. At one point, Lois Lane talks to a few civilians, but other than that, we only ever see superheroes and supervillains fighting each other. We don't actually get to see a whole lot of non-powered people on this world. This kind of reminds me of the 2099 comics that I've named myself after. At the end of that run of comics in the 90s, all of the 2099 comics came to an end because this big flood basically destroyed the planet. And all the characters who survived the flood, they went to the Savage Land to try and rebuild their society from scratch. And you got to see a whole lot of superheroes trying to rebuild society, not just build things, infrastructure, stuff like that, but they were also trying to make things work politically. They were trying to run things and try and keep everyone from killing each other, and that's missing here. We basically just see superheroes arguing with each other over whether they should turn on the Genesis device, and I feel like we need to see more of these guys saying like, hey, let's build some sewage and stuff like that. We do get to see a little bit of that. The Flash at one point, he is basically turned into a pack mule to rebuild this world, and that's kind of an excuse for his character to be very inconsistent with how he was portrayed originally, but we need to see more of that. Less of these characters fighting each other, more of them trying to rebuild a world, because that is a problem that would be very difficult for them to overcome, even with their superpowers. And I feel like that would be more interesting to see them tackle those problems than it would be, okay, here's someone who I disagree with, I'm going to punch them in the face. So anyway, don't really like this book, but it's much, much better than World 2 Earth's End, or, Earth 2 World's End. Anyway, much better than that. So anyway, those are my thoughts on this book. I hope that you guys like this review, and if you did, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I'll be back tomorrow with a different video. In the meantime, you guys have a great rest of your day. Catch you later.